It began with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing at precisely 3:17 a.m. Every member of the Moreland family received a call from the same unknown number. No voice, just silence and a faint sound beneath the static, like wind passing through a tunnel. No one gave it much thought the next morning, brushing it off as a prank or glitch. But by noon, 16-year-old Amelia Moreland, the quiet, observant artist of the household, had disappeared without a trace. Her shoes were still by the door, her sketchbook open on her desk, a graphite drawing unfinished. There was no sign of forced entry, no witness, no ransom note. As the hours stretched into days, more strange calls came, always in the dead of night, always from the same number, always silent. Then, more people began to vanish, not just in the Moreland neighborhood, but across town. Each disappearance followed the same pattern. A late-night call, silence, and then absence. The missing left behind no digital footprints, no phone records, not even fingerprints. It was as if they were plucked from reality, leaving behind only questions, rumors, and fear. Now, 8 people are connected by a web of eerie coincidences and unanswered calls. Together, they must uncover what links them before one of them becomes the next to vanish. Welcome to Storiosity's videos. The town of Elmswood had always been the kind of place people forgot existed. Nestled between miles of farmland and old, disused railway lines. It was a town where clocks ticked slowly and everyone knew each other's business. Until they didn't. On the morning of June 14th, that changed. The Moreland residence, a modest white brick house on the corner of Brighton and 3rd, was the epicenter. It started with Amelia, but no one realized she was missing until hours later. That morning, the house was unusually quiet. Her mother, Elaine, had assumed Amelia was still asleep. It wasn't until noon, when her father, Peter, returned from the clinic for lunch, that the quiet felt wrong. Amelia's phone was on the kitchen counter. Her sketchbook lay on her desk, untouched since the previous night. Her bedroom window was locked from the inside. The Morelands called the police by 2 p.m. Officer Jared Klein, who had known Amelia since she was in diapers, took the call himself. At first, he believed it was just a case of teenage rebellion. Maybe Amelia had stormed off after a fight, or gone to her friends without telling anyone. But when he entered her room and saw the still wet graphite pencil marks on her sketchpad, he felt something he wouldn't admit aloud: dread. It wasn't just a missing person case. It was an interruption. Something had cracked the rhythm of Elmswood by 6 p.m. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch. Neighbors wandered over after seeing the squad car, their curiosity thinly veiled. Mrs. Delaney, from across the street, brought over a tray of lemon squares, comfort disguised as obligation. The whispers began to ripple. A few claimed they'd heard footsteps in the alley around midnight. Others talked about a shadowy figure seen in the woods. But no one mentioned the call. Not yet. It wasn't until Officer Klein started reviewing phone logs that he noticed something odd. The Morelands landline had received a call at exactly 3:17 a.m. So had Peter's cell. So had Elaine's. All from the same unknown number. Klein asked Peter and Elaine if they remembered the calls. They had assumed it was a scammer or pocket dial. Neither answered. Amelia's phone also received a call at 3:17. She answered. The call lasted 11 seconds. No one spoke. Just static. Then a short, almost imperceptible whistle like wind in a drain pipe. She never called anyone afterward. No messages. No social media activity. It was as if that final call had erased her. That night, Peter couldn't sleep. He sat by the window with a blanket draped around his shoulders, staring into the front yard. Every creak in the house made him flinch. He replayed everything: what she wore last, what she said at dinner, if he missed a sign. The silence of the night pressed in like fog. He checked the time, 3:16. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He let it ring. At 3:17, it stopped. No voicemail. The next morning, Klein returned to the station, where he learned something that made his blood run cold. 2 other teenagers in the region had also vanished overnight, in towns nearly 30 miles apart. Both had received calls at 3:17 a.m. One of the mothers had tried calling the number back. It didn't exist, not in any database, not in any record. It wasn't just a phone call. It was a warning. And Elmswood was only the beginning. At the edge of town, where the paved streets gave way to gravel roads and rusted barbed wire fences, lived the Carson. 17 years old Devon Carson was the kind of boy who drifted through life like smoke, quiet, half present, never quite touched by the world around him. He'd skipped school the day Amelia disappeared. Not because he was involved, at least. Not yet, but because the call had come to him to Dot. At 3:17 a.m., Devon had woken suddenly, drenched in sweat, his phone buzzing like it was alive in his hand. The number on the screen wasn't familiar, but it felt familiar. He answered, static, whispers, a high-pitched whistle, just on the edge of human hearing. He said, "Hello," 3 times. Then he hung up. He didn't sleep again. By noon, he had heard about Amelia. His stomach dropped, not because they were close, but because he had drawn her just 2 nights before. Not intentionally. He was sketching in his notebook, letting his mind wander, when her face had formed in the graphite. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with realization. That detail had kept him awake long after the drawing was done. Now, staring at it again, he noticed something else. In the corner of the sketch, barely visible, was the outline of a clock. The hands were at 3:17. Meanwhile, Officer Klein was trying to track the signal. The number left no trace. It wasn't registered to any carrier. No pings on cell towers. It was as if the call didn't come from any network that should exist. He contacted neighboring towns and found a disturbing pattern. To more disappearances. Both teens. Both received the same call. But now, the parents were talking. One mentioned a dream the night before, the call a tunnel of wind and flickering lights. Another said their child had mentioned a voice whispering numbers before bed. Klein started to consider something he would never put in a report. This wasn't just about missing kids. It was coordinated, and it was expanding. Back at Elmswood High, word had spread. Amelia wasn't the first to go, but she was the first from their school. Students whispered in hallways, speculating wildly: cults, kidnappings, aliens. Teachers tried to calm the atmosphere, but fear clung to the walls. In room 204, history teacher Miss Patel had noticed something strange. The classroom clocks all stopped at the same time the day Amelia vanished. Jam 3:17. The maintenance crew claimed it was just a glitch. She wasn't convinced. That evening, she received a call. She didn't answer, but she saved the number. Devon wasn't alone. 6 others across the county had received the same call. Only 3 were still around. They didn't know each other yet, but each of them had something unusual happen after the call. Devon with his drawing. A girl in Bellingham started sleepwalking for the first time in her life, waking up outside at dawn. A boy in Langley began writing in a language he didn't recognize. No one knew what it meant, but all of them felt one thing in common, like they were being watched. Not in the usual way, something deeper, colder, ancient. In the following days, those who had received the call began finding each other, drawn by news reports, online forums, or pure instinct. Devin started documenting everything, his dreams, the drawings, the pattern of sounds in the call. He noticed that every person who had vanished shared one thing: they were all connected by geography. A perfect circle, with Elmswood at the center. The realization hit him hard. Whatever this was, it was radiating outward. And the next disappearance, he feared, would bring it one step closer to completing that circle. The morning fog hung thick over Elmswood, dulling the light and muting the world to a hush. Elaine Moreland stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, eyes swollen from a night of restless pacing. She hadn't heard from the police yet. Klein had promised updates, but silence stretched like a cruel thread. She turned her head sharply at the sound of gravel shifting. Nothing there, just the fog curling along the road. Then her phone vibrated. Another unknown number. She froze. It was 3:17 p.m. this time. She didn't answer, but a voicemail icon appeared. She opened it with trembling hands. There was no voice, just static again, and beneath it, layered faintly in the noise, was something that chilled her to the bone. Her daughter whispering, "I'm here." At the station, Klein was hitting walls. The phone company couldn't trace the number. The signal wasn't pinging any towers. The FBI liaison he'd contacted was skeptical at first, until he showed them the cluster of 317 calls and the precise geographic pattern of the disappearances. It wasn't a straight line. It was forming a perfect spiral, curling inward toward a central point. Something was drawing them in, pulling from different towns in a design that no random event could replicate. Klein now had 5 families on record with missing teens, and 3 with similar call logs. But the real problem: none of the calls matched a normal signal format. It was as if they came from outside the grid. Devin found himself at a bus stop on the edge of town, waiting for someone he'd never met. Her name was Riley Sato, a 16-year-old from Maple Hollow who'd posted a blurry screenshot of her own call log on a private subreddit devoted to unsolved tech anomalies. Devin messaged her, half expecting it to be fake, but she responded quickly and seriously. She, too, had heard the static, the whistle, the feeling of being pulled. They agreed to meet in person. When she arrived, she looked pale, sleep-deprived, clutching a journal packed with drawings, numbers, and symbols that Devin didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Their first words to each other were the same. It's not random. As the two compared notes, something clicked. Riley had recorded the static using an old tape recorder. When played backward, the sound wasn't just noise. It was rhythmic, patterned. Devin used audio software to stretch it, slow it, and clean it. What emerged was a low hum layered with faint, human speech, like dozens of voices speaking at once. Words began to emerge. The line is open. The point is near. Find the center. Their blood ran cold. Riley's journal had a map of all the known call locations. When Devin added the new ones, they both saw it. The pattern didn't just spiral. It was forming a glyph, like an ancient symbol buried in the land itself. Ms. Patel, the history teacher, was now researching on her own. She had noticed symbols carved into one of the old trees near the school. Symbols that matched something she saw in an ancient book on indigenous boundary markings, a language not spoken in centuries, meant to keep something in, not out. She photocopied the pages and pinned them to her classroom wall behind a fake map of Elm. She didn't want to believe the town was cursed, but she was starting to believe it was chosen. That night, she found her own clock frozen at 3:17 a.m. It had stopped ticking entirely. As the group expanded, wordlessly connected by fear and instinct, a realization began to grow between them. This wasn't about who they were. It was about where they were. The disappearances were a ritual of location, not personality. Devon theorized that the center, whatever it was preparing for something. The spiral wasn't finished. The glyph wasn't whole, and until it was, the line would remain open, the static would return, and more would vanish. Unless they found the point first. It was Riley who first found the name. Station 13, not a radio station, not a train stop, but something else. She discovered it in the footnote of an archived county surveyor's report from 1962. Buried in the local historical society's website. The note described a weather recording station located deep within the Pine Brush Reserve, a swath of dense forest that most Elmswood residents didn't even realize was government. It was listed as decommissioned in 1971, but there were no details on who operated it. The coordinates Riley found didn't appear on any modern map. When she and Devon overlaid them onto their glyph pattern, a chill ran through them both. The station sat precisely at the center. Officer Klein was growing increasingly uneasy. He hadn't told the families yet, but the 3 teens still receiving the calls had now reported sleepwalking, auditory hallucinations, and time loss. One girl said she walked to a bathroom and came to standing outside her house in her pajamas. Another described a strange humming she could feel in her bones when she stood near any metal surface. And then there were the drawings. Without prompting, each teen began sketching the same jagged spiral, the same crescent symbol, and disturbingly, a doorway. Klein felt something slipping beneath the fabric of the town. He began to question whether he was looking for people or signs. Riley and Devon decided to go to the Pine Brush Reserve, equipped with a compass, 2 flashlights, and her grandfather's field radio. Devon's gut told him someone or something was watching them before they even left the tree line. The deeper they ventured, the more unnatural the forest felt. The birds had stopped. The wind didn't move the leaves, and Riley's compass spun with no logic. Just when they thought they were lost, Devon spotted a clearing. At its center stood a rusted building, barely visible through the overgrowth. It had no signage, but a shattered keypad and tangled wires beside the door suggested it hadn't been abandoned naturally. A broken sign on the ground confirmed it. Station 13, inside. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but the temperature was oddly warm. The equipment was ancient Rialto tapes, analog monitors, switchboards with blinking lights that shouldn't be blinking. Riley powered on the tape recorder. It whirred, hissed, and then began to play back audio. Not weather patterns, but recordings of conversations. Panicked voices. People talking about strange dreams, phones ringing at odd hours, vanishing relatives. The final tape ended in static, and the whistle. They were listening to echoes of the past, possibly from others who received the calls before them. It meant this had happened before, and possibly it had never stopped. Riley found a logbook. The last entry was dated November 3rd, 1971. It read, "Third breach, confirmed. They're not dead. They're somewhere else. Don't open the line again. If you hear the sound, burn the wires. She and Devon exchanged a look of silent understanding. This place had been shut down not because it was obsolete, but because someone had tried to stop what was happening now. But something had gone wrong. The line had reopened, and now the pattern was reactivating itself, seeking new recipients, new coordinates, new echoes, back in town. Ms. Patel had taken a student spiral drawing and layered it over old city planning maps. Her hand trembled when the spiral perfectly aligned with a series of defunct electrical relay points, an invisible grid hidden beneath elms. The spirals weren't random art. They were maps, signals, coordinates. Her theory grew bold. The calls were not just summoning individuals. They were syncing locations. The glyph wasn't just symbolic. It was technological, something older than language, older than the town, but now pulsing with life again. By the time Riley and Devon returned to Elmswood, they both felt it. Something had shifted. The air was thicker, the town quieter. That night, at 3:17 a.m., all 8 of the remaining call recipients received another ring. This time, none of them heard static. This time, a voice spoke one word, unmistakably clear. Awaken. Devon didn't sleep after the voice. Neither did Riley. The word had echoed in their heads like a bell rung inside a steel chamber. Awaken. It wasn't a command. It was a state, as if something had been dormant in them, waiting, and now the line had reconnected. Devon sat at his desk, headphones on, listening to the slowed-down audio from the latest call. Riley joined over a video call, her wall covered in maps and string. Together, they noticed something strange in the static's waveform, a pattern that kept repeating, not just noise, numbers, binary code. When translated, it gave them 6-digit coordinates. When plotted, the location fell just outside Elmswood, on private land owned by a shell corporation nobody had heard of. Officer Klein had begun, experiencing the side effects too. On his dashboard camera, the date kept reverting to 1971 during patrols near the pine brush perimeter. He heard static bleed through his radio when it wasn't even on. And, worst of all, he found himself waking up in the woods behind the station, feet muddy, gun missing, phone dead. His therapist blamed stress. But when he discovered claw marks on his patrol car's interior door marks, he didn't remember making stopped looking for medical explanations. Instead, he called Elaine Moreland. "I think she's alive," he told her. "But not here. Not in the way we understand here." Elaine's voicemail, the one that whispered, "I'm here," was now under forensic analysis. But Klein took it further. He played the message backward and compared the frequency to recordings from Station 13. They matched almost perfectly, except for one thing: Amelia's voice. Faint but clear, repeated a set of numbers over and over. A time 3 hours, 17 minutes and 45 seconds. Elaine wept when she heard it, not out of fear, but hope. Amelia was alive. Somehow, she had found a way to speak through the static, and she was counting down, the teens now calling themselves. The 8 met that afternoon in the basement of the town library. They were Riley, Devon, Tayser, Jonah, Kyle, Marissa, Anthony, and Juno. Each had received the call. Each had drawn the spiral, and each had experienced sleepwalking or hearing the whistle during waking hours. Devon stood at the whiteboard, red marker in hand. "What if the glyph isn't just a symbol," he said, "but a circuit? A device that only works when all its parts are awake and aligned." Riley added, "And what if we're the parts?" The room fell silent. That possibility, unspoken until now, hung over them like fog. Ms. Patel, now fully involved, brought an old municipal plan of the town's original infrastructure. The water system, the electrical grid, and even the now abandoned trolley lines from the early 1900s were all strangely centered around a now erased structure listed only as Node 0. There were no photos, no written description, just the name and coordinates that matched the ones Devon had decoded. The 8 knew where they had to go. But something was changing in the town itself. Birds flew in circles above that site. Radios in nearby houses wouldn't turn off, even when unplugged. Dogs barked in unison at 3:17 every night. The town was reacting. That night, the final call came, but differently. At 3:17 a.m., every TV, every phone, every speaker in Elmswood turned on, even those without power. Static filled the air. All 8 stood separately in their own homes, staring at the glow. This time, the voice didn't whisper. It spoke a sequence of coordinates. Then, the line is open. The circuit awaits. They all knew the message was meant only for them. The spiral was nearly complete. One location remained, one final connection. And when they met there, something would answer. The coordinates led the 8 to a clearing just outside the industrial ruins of the old Elm paper mill, an area long fenced off by the county due to environmental instability. But on the town's oldest map, it was labeled simply as Node 0, the origin point of all infrastructure. As the group approached it at dusk, something pulsed beneath their feet. They weren't imagining it. The ground hummed. Juno, the most skeptical among them, held up her EMF reader, originally bought as a joke, and watched a needle jump into red. "That's not a power line," she whispered. "That's something alive." The clearing wasn't just earth. It was structured, circular, etched with faint lines in concrete that had eroded into the surrounding soil. Standing stones, no taller than a person, encircled the space at precise intervals, worn smooth as if from countless hands over generations. Riley traced her fingers along one and paused. Symbols, once hidden by moss, shimmered faintly under her touch. "This is the same language from Station 13, she said. "The warnings, but it's not a warning anymore. It's an activation code." The others gathered around her. One by one, each of them recognized patterns they'd been drawing in their notebooks. They were part of the circle, and this, somehow, had been waiting for them. Devon stepped into the center, the exact midpoint marked by a depression in the ground, no larger than a dinner plate. He placed a recorder there, the same one they used on the Station 13 tapes. "Let's see what you hear now," he said quietly. Static filled the device. Then the whistle, then Amelia's voice again. Not frantic this time, clear, calm. "You're almost here." One more turn, Marissa's knees gave out from the weight of the moment. "She's not in another place," she murmured. "She's in this one, but out of sync." The theory clicked. The glyph, the call, the circle, it wasn't just pulling people away. It was trying to realign them with something unseen. Ms. Patel arrived minutes later, holding a yellowed notebook she had borrowed from the local archives. "It's not just a design," she told them. "It's a harmonic trigger. The spiral, the times, even your positions, it's all about resonance." The original surveyor from 1897 warned that this land vibrated at a frequency not of this world. Something about the rocks, the magnetic alignment, the angle of the sun. They didn't build the town here by accident. They built it to hold something down. Riley and Devon exchanged a glance. If that were true, then their presence here wasn't a coincidence. It was a recurrence. The 8 stood in their positions around the circle, unsure of what would happen next. As the sun dipped below the tree line, the space grew impossibly quiet. Not just silent, soundless. The birds stopped. The wind stopped. Even the recorder, now rolling, captured nothing. Not static, not air, nothing. Then, at 3:17 a.m., exactly, the center of the circle glowed faintly. No sparks, no smoke, just the subtle shimmer of heat waves over stone. And then Amelia appeared, not fully, a flicker, a shimmer in the center of the depression. Her form buzzed like a television caught between channels. She didn't speak, but her lips moved. Riley leaned closer, translating silently. Turn the key. Close the gate. Then the glow faded, and with it, Amelia. But the 8 were no longer alone. The air around them was humming again. Louder, the resonance wasn't fading. It was building. The circle had responded, and now it was waiting for one final input. They didn't know what the key was, or the gate, but they knew one thing with certainty. Whatever had pulled Amelia from the world hadn't finished, and whatever bridge had brought her back, even for a moment, had left the door cracked open. The following morning, the 8 were scattered across Elmswood, each of them feeling the aftershocks of what they had witnessed at Node. 0. Devon sat at his desk, staring at the recorder, now silent, as if the machine itself had gone deaf. Riley was in her attic, thumbing through the pages of her grandfather's journal's entries about geomagnetic faults, intermittent spatial folds, and a reference to something he'd labeled the harmonic threshold. It matched what they'd felt at the circle, an atmospheric tuning fork vibrating at frequencies just above human perception. The problem was, now the tuning fork was ringing louder. Officer Klein met with Ms. Patel in the old-school archives room. Whatever Amelia meant by close the gate, she said, it implies there's still an opening. Maybe it's not physical. Maybe it's vibrational. Something that needs to be cancelled out, not sealed. Klein considered the implications. If the town had been built to suppress a harmonic resonance, and the line had been reopened by some shift celestial, technological, or otherwise, then everything the town had buried for generations was reawakening. The gate wasn't somewhere. It was when, and 317 was its keyhole. Riley and Devon reassembled the group that afternoon at Ms. Patel's classroom. They had discovered that each member of the 8 had something that didn't exist before the first call. An anchor, a sketch, a dream, a melody, or, in Anthony's case, a hum he couldn't stop whistling in his sleep. These were not random symptoms. They were artifacts of the alignment. Riley had a wild theory. What if these were not side effects, but inputs, unique tones and symbols that, when brought together, could either complete the circuit or overwrite it? If the calls activated the spiral, she said, maybe we can reverse the signal by finishing the glyph. Juno, the audio prodigy of the group, used her equipment to isolate the overlapping tones in the latest recordings. Each one resonated at slightly different frequencies, but when mixed together, they formed a complex harmonic chord. It's like a song, she said, but it's missing a note. Riley had a guess what it might be. Amelia. Her voice had formed part of the resonance at the circle. If she was still broadcasting somehow, they might be able to reach her again, but not in the same place. Devon suggested an older, stronger junction, the transmission tower on Watchman's Hill, decommissioned for decades, but still intact. As they prepared their plan, a new anomaly appeared. The town itself began shifting. Streetlights flickered in perfect rhythm at 3:17 a.m., regardless of weather. Clock towers across Elmswood stopped and started again at intervals matching the 8's pulse rates. The spirals began showing up in places they hadn't drawn them, faint impressions on glass, water stains on ceilings, even shadows cast from misaligned blinds. Something was pushing through. The line was no longer just open. It was transmitting back. The decision was made. They would climb Watchman's Hill that night and attempt to replicate the signal this time, with all 8 in sync, carrying their anchors, playing the reconstructed cord into the tower's long-dead antenna. It was risky. They didn't know if it would work, but they also knew what would happen if they did nothing. The circuit would complete itself, and then more would vanish. Maybe the entire town, maybe something worse. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows stretched thin and long across Elmswood, the 8 began their silent ascent up the hill. No one spoke. They didn't need to. In their hands were the things that connected them to the signal. In their minds was the cord, and somewhere beneath their feet the spiral pulsed, waiting for them to either silence it or join it forever. The summit of Watchman's Hill was cloaked in unnatural quiet. No crickets, no rustling branches. The old transmission tower stood like a steel skeleton against the indigo sky, rusted but unbowed, its cables like limp veins waiting to carry a final pulse. The 8 stood in a wide circle at its base, each holding their anchor. Devon with Amelia's last sketch, Riley with her grandfather's journal, Anthony clutching his tuning fork, and the others with relics of the signals, reach tokens they never asked for but now couldn't abandon. Above them, the stars flickered in strange rhythms, some brighter than usual, some almost pulsing with breath. Juno connected her portable amp to a salvaged broadcast unit they'd hauled up by wagon. The antenna was still wired into the old copper trunk lines that ran through the town's foundations. If the theory was correct, the tower's geometry signal seeking would amplify their harmonic chord and resonate backward, countering the activation from node 0. This isn't just about cancelling the signal, she warned. It's about waking up the town, forcing the line shut before it becomes irreversible. She nodded to Riley, who pressed play. The sound that emerged wasn't music, not exactly. It was layered. Devon's drawn line turned to tone, Riley's whispered passage set to rhythm, Anthony's hum vibrating with the rest. The chord rang out like a question posed to the stars themselves. The tower shuddered. Lights in the valley below flickered. The air thickened. At 3:17 exactly, the tower emitted a high, piercing note and split the silence wide open. From the center of their circle, the air twisted. Light bent. A shimmer rose like steam, forming a shape a person. Amelia, whole but translucent, like she was being held between 2 versions of the world. Her eyes searched them, recognizing every face. She opened her mouth, and this time they heard her clearly. You found the point. Now turn it back. She raised her hand, palm out, as if pushing against an unseen door. The cord began to distort. The air pushed in. Devon stepped forward and laid her sketch in the center of the circle. Close the gate, he whispered. A great wind erupted from nowhere, not moving around them, but through them, like a breath exhaled by the town itself. The tower's top flashed once, then went dark. In the circle, Amelia began to fade, not painfully, but with a kind of peace. Her image brightened once more, then fractured into points of light, like glass scattering in reverse. The sound stopped. The air cleared. And just like that, she was gone. No static, no signal, no whisper. The 8 stood in stunned silence. Juno checked the time, 3:18. For the first time in weeks, the clock had moved forward. Down in Elmswood, the streetlights steadied. The spirals faded. The birds began to chirp again. Devon looked at Riley. "Do you think it's over?" She answered without turning. "No, but I think we passed the message on, and she was right." Weeks passed. The calls stopped. The spiral disappeared from mirrors, pages, and dreams. But in their quiet corners, each of the 8 still heard something, an echo of a question not yet answered. They weren't chosen to disappear. They were chosen to hold the line, to wake up a town built on silence and signal, to stop something ancient from finishing its pattern, and somewhere, buried deep beneath Node 0, the last thread of the glyph pulsed once, then went still. The line was broken, but the circuit remembers. Dr. Harmon once worked on classified audio frequency experiments for a branch of the Department of Energy in the late 70s. After retiring quietly to Elmswood, she faded from public view, living in a secluded cabin near Pinebrush Reserve. Unknown to most, she was part of the original shutdown operation for Station 13, where she studied subharmonic interference patterns caused by geomagnetic anomalies. Current role in the story. After seeing the town's power flickers and reading of Amelia's disappearance, Dr. Harmon contacts Officer Klein through an anonymous letter. She warns him that the harmonic field they once believed dormant has likely reactivated. Eventually, she becomes a mentor figure to Riley and Devon, providing old blueprints, sonic field maps, and insights into how the glyph might be a self-aware signal architecture. Her knowledge helps the 8 understand the technical side of the ritual and how to reverse it without risking collapse of their reality's boundaries. Arc, Dr. Harmon, is haunted by her past failure to fully shut down the signal decades ago. Helping the 8 is her form of redemption, though she fears the spiral will someday call to her again. Leo is a late-night radio host and conspiracy theorist who broadcasts from a converted garage studio in Elm, known for covering weird frequencies, unexplained and government cover-ups. Most locals see him as harmless entertainment until the events of the story begin echoing his past. Broadcasts, current role in the story. When members of the 8 hear Leo mention calls that come at 3:17 on air before any news is public, they confront him. Leo reveals he's been receiving recordings from anonymous sources for months, strange static files, distorted voices, and coordinates. He becomes a reluctant ally, using his network to trace the call's signal pathway, even managing to pirate a burst of it live on -air.arc. Leo goes from fringe outsider to essential informant, realizing his wild theories may have always been rooted in truth. As the spiral intensifies, his broadcasts become more erratic, eventually hinting that he, too, may have received the call, and might soon be next.